In life, there are three. You know what? There are four guarantees in life: death, taxes, me coming on YouTube rambling in a wrinkled shirt, and Jim Harbaugh being a successful football coach. But today, we're going to talk about Justin Herbert's fantasy value once Jim Harbaugh steps in as the head coach of the Chargers in 2024. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy, and let's get right into it. I did my absolute best to kind of give us a little theme for this. I'm usually wearing a Yankee hat or some kind of hat, but today I decided to go with the LA Dodgers hat. We're talking about the LA Chargers. It's only right. But before we get into the LA Chargers, let's talk about Jim Harbaugh and his coaching career, whether it's collegiate or the NFL. Let's start as recent as this past college football season. In 2023, the Michigan Wolverines won the national championship and were 14th in the nation in points per game, which is pretty great. But where things get tricky is out of 133 teams that qualified for this stat, the Michigan Wolverines were 120th in passing attempts this past season. And I understand they had way better depth at running back than they did pass catchers, but to be 120th out of 133 is pretty alarming if you're going to have Justin Herbert, who's somebody who loves to throw the ball 40, even 50 times in a game. Now, these numbers could have just been one season, given that J.J. McCarthy, not that he's a bad quarterback, but somebody that doesn't like to air the ball out. Maybe this is just some kind of fluke, but it's not. In 2022, the Wolverines ranked 113th out of the same 133 qualifying teams. It does get better for Harbaugh's Wolverines, as in 2021, which is just 3 years ago. The Wolverines were 95th out of 133 teams in passing attempts. So they will pass, but this is not an offense that we've seen before that kind of fits the LA Chargers mold, where Herbert or whoever the quarterback is likes to be throwing at quite a high volume. Now, let me be clear. The NFL is a whole different animal than college football, and I totally understand that. But in Harbaugh's NFL coaching career, though he had 3 seasons where they were fantastic and won 12 games or more, they've shown you in the NFL that they would rather run. In Harbaugh's 4 years as an NFL coach, his offense never peaked higher than 11th in total points scored. Now, 11th is pretty good, and they were consistently 11th, so I don't want this stat to be misconstrued in any way, but you need a top 10, top 5 scoring offense if you're going to have somebody like Justin Herbert, who's going to throw the ball a lot and be able to throw the ball and place it anywhere he wants to on the field. As we all know, Justin Herbert has been fantastic since he came into the NFL. He was the QB9 in fantasy his rookie season in 2020. Didn't even play every game. Following that up in 2021, he finished as the quarterback 2 overall, which is extremely, extremely impressive. And finally, in 2022, as he was battling rib injuries and still played a good amount of those games, he finished as the QB11, which is still solid. And even though it didn't feel like an incredible season last year, before Herbert went down with an injury, he was the QB6. So if you did draft him and you were starting him every week, you really felt that impact versus other quarterbacks that were a little disappointing, like maybe a Patrick Mahomes who you took with an early draft pick. When looking at Harbaugh's successful seasons in San Francisco, because we can kind of just throw the 8-8 season out the window, it was the end of that, I don't want to call it dynasty, but very successful run that the 49ers had. In 2011, Harbaugh's 49ers were ranked 31st in pass attempts. 31st out of 32 teams. That is not very good. And in a league today where no NFL team last year ran and had more rushing attempts than they did passing attempts, Harbaugh's team had 47 more rushing attempts than they did passing attempts. This seems like an outdated offense, and if they want Justin Herbert to have elite fantasy value, there's a good chance that they're going to have to change some of the basics that brought them so much success in the NFL with San Francisco. In that 2011 season, Alex Smith was the quarterback for the 49ers. Now, I'm not going to come out here and say that Alex Smith is an elite QB at this time, but he wasn't bad. He was a very, very good quarterback. But even then, Harbaugh only allowed less than 28 passing attempts per game on average. So they clearly would rather have the ball on the ground, run it, and play defense versus letting somebody throw the ball 35 or even 40 times like the talented Justin Herbert. And after an incredible run to the NFC Championship game in 2011, Harbaugh's Niners again had a phenomenal season, but it also came with being 31st out of, guess what, how many? 32 teams in the NFL in passing attempts. So again, minimal passing opportunity. This could affect Justin Herbert in a negative way. But before we get into how it could, I just want to go over the last really good season of the 49ers, and then we could compare how this may not be a good thing for Justin Herbert or how this could find success for Justin Herbert in the future. In 2013, the 49ers fell to the bottom and were 32nd out of 32 teams in passing attempts. They had 88 more rushing attempts than they did throwing. And yes, they didn't have phenomenal talent on the perimeter. They had Michael Crabtree, who was a great receiver, great career receiver at least, but never was a mega star in the NFL. So these kind of numbers are alarming to me as somebody that would want to draft Justin Herbert and hope that with the weapons they have, maybe even potentially if they go ahead and draft Brock Bowers this year in the draft as they're projected to do so, you would like to think that a vertical tight end plus Keenan Allen and other great weapons would create high fantasy value for Justin Herbert, but this offense may hinder him more than it helps him. Like I said before, Alex Smith was never an elite quarterback, but always a very reliable quarterback, to say the least. And it goes to show that once he left San Francisco and went to Kansas City, he had 898 more passing yards on just 60 more attempts than he would have in San Francisco. So I would like to believe that Harbaugh's running, controlling the clock, and playing defense had something to do with Alex Smith only, just reaching just the tip of the ceiling of what he actually could be as an NFL quarterback. And I'm not saying that Justin Herbert is going to play bad this season. I just believe that somebody like Justin Herbert needs that 30-plus passing attempts. And if Jim Harbaugh is going to run the ball and control time of possession like he did in the pros and like he did at Michigan, then it could damage a little bit, or should I say hinder Justin Herbert's fantasy value, whereas last year you would have drafted Justin Herbert, let's just say, at like QB5, QB6, right in the middle of your draft, feeling like I have an elite upside, elite potential fantasy quarterback. And this season, that might not be the case. But we're going to go over how that could be possible. We just seen the 49ers run a West Coast offense, which is exactly what Jim Harbaugh is going to bring to the LA Chargers. And Brock Purdy was able to be an elite fantasy QB option. He only threw the ball 28 times on average per game, yes. But where it gets tricky is somebody like Brock Purdy threw a touchdown on 7% of his dropbacks. 7% is incredibly high. It's an elite metric. Whereas Justin Herbert, obviously, like we stated before, elite quarterback. Justin Herbert has only managed in his career so far to throw a touchdown on 5.7% of his dropbacks. So that's quite the difference between somebody like Brock Purdy, who's doing it at an elite clip with less passing attempts, than someone like Justin Herbert, who's getting it done at around 5.7% is his best. Now, granted, last year was the least amount of times he threw the ball, obviously because of injuries, but even then, Justin Herbert averaged 35 passing attempts per game. So for him to have that elite fantasy value, he cannot be somebody like Brock Purdy throwing only 28 passing attempts per game. But it can still work, because in the West Coast offense, if they're running the ball and they're getting it outside past the tackles, it's going to open up a lot of play action opportunity for Justin Herbert to just fake the run, drop back, roll to his right, and just air out a 50-yard dart to somebody down the field. If he's throwing the ball 28 times a game on average, he's probably not going to have many opportunities to just roll to his strong side and just flick the ball as far as he possibly can, because this offense is going to want to control time of possession, play really good defense. And even though the Chargers defense hasn't been good in years past, with bringing in guys like Navarro Bowman, who have been around great defenses before as a coach, and they do have really good players on defense. Some of them might get cut or traded depending on how the future of the Chargers may go. A lot is still unclear because we're obviously in the offseason and we don't know who they're going to use their first round pick on per se, or even if they're going to sign back Austin Eckler. In the last 5 seasons, only 3 quarterbacks, including Brock Purdy, were able to throw for less than 450 passing attempts, which on average would come out to about less than 28 times per game, and still find a way to finish as a top 10 quarterback. So we have Brock Purdy, who got there because of his incredibly high touchdown percentage, which could work for Justin Herbert, but given his career stats shows us it's kind of unlikely that he's just going to go from being an over 5.5 touchdown percentage guy to over 7%. Like, that's just a way too high of an increase, given that he's somebody that throws the ball a lot, throws a lot of completions, and isn't somebody that's getting carried by a running game. Back in 2021, Jalen Hurts was able to do it in less than 450 passing attempts, and this was because he had 10 rushing touchdowns on the ground, something that I know for a fact Justin Herbert is not capable of. It's just not part of his game. He's a way better thrower than he is runner. In 2020, Lamar Jackson got it done with even way under 400 passing attempts. But the reason that was possible was, again, he ran for over 1,000 yards and had 7 rushing touchdowns, which is great for fantasy. But these numbers are just not going to be given to Justin Herbert in this opportunity. Is it possible that Justin Herbert can bring in a top 10 finish at the quarterback position? I'm not too entirely sure. Luckily, Brock Purdy showed us last year that there is a game plan for it in the West Coast offense, but it's going to take elite metrics to get there. Harbaugh is bringing in his guy from San Francisco when they were fantastic, and that's Greg Roman. So Greg Roman is going to be the offensive coordinator. Depending on where you live in the States, you might have heard good things about Greg Roman. You might have heard fire Greg Roman back when he was in Baltimore. But the truth is, if we're going to be honest about Greg Roman and his offensive coordinating skills, he did deliver Lamar Jackson's MVP season, which in my opinion was way better than Lamar Jackson's MVP season in 2023. So before we discredit him and say that he may not know what he's doing or his style of play is outdated, let's just take into consideration that he was able to give and put out the best version of Lamar Jackson we've seen in the NFL. That is 100% fair to say. But if we are in the business of being fair, we should look at what Greg Roman most recently did in Baltimore before he was fired after the 2022 season, which was the Baltimore Ravens were 19th in total points in the NFL season, which is not very telltale for a good offense. You want definitely something in the top 10, maybe even top 5, especially if you're going to have a quarterback like Justin Herbert who can move the ball down the field. It wasn't all bad, though, for Greg Roman and the Baltimore Ravens. Their 2019 and 2020 seasons, they were considered an elite offense. But no, not either one of those seasons were considered a pass-heavy offense. It was run the ball, control the clock. It sounds like a common theme that we have here, but the truth is it's not something that I made up. It's something that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman have made up, and they're on the same page, and they're going to bring this kind of system to the LA Chargers. In 2019, the Baltimore Ravens were 32nd in passing attempts, 27th in passing yards, and then first in both rushing attempts and rushing yards. So there's an obvious game plan. They want to run the ball. They want to control the clock and keep the ball out of the quarterback's hands. But Justin Herbert is not Lamar Jackson. Justin Herbert has way better throwing ability. So we shouldn't see a team with 32nd in passing attempts. But their track record and their history is showing us that they want to run the ball and run the ball effectively. Even in 2020, they were not a very good passing offense. They were towards the bottom of the league again in 2020. But they were number 1 in rushing attempts, they were number 1 in rushing yards, and they were even number 1 in rushing yards per attempt. So clearly they were doing something right in the run game. The Chargers, depending on whether they want to keep Austin Eckler or not, could go back to being an elite run-first offense. But if they don't address that need and they just expect Herbert to throw the ball and hand it off occasionally with other guys, I'm not sure if they're going to get the results that they're looking for in years past when Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh were elite football masterminds. It doesn't 100% mean that if they want to have success, they need to give the ball more to Justin Herbert, because for all the things that I've just said, they have had an amazing run in the NFL at just run the ball, play good defense, and control time of possession. But if they want this to work in LA, if they want to have a successful tenure as LA Chargers personnel, they're going to have to give the ball to Justin Herbert. But I don't have any reason to believe that they're going to give him more than 35 passing attempts per game. So with that being said, the numbers and the history are kind of stacked against us if we want, an elite finish from an elite quarterback in Justin Herbert in fantasy. I'm not sure exactly where his ADP is going to be come around, June, July, August when we really start drafting. But I'm not so sold that we should be taking Justin Herbert with as early of a pick as we did in 2023. If you disagree with me, you think I'm just absolutely spewing, let me know in the comments. We can have a discussion about it. And if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. If you're new here and you like the content, feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. That's all I got for everyone today. I'm signing out. Everyone have a wonderful day. Peace.